Welcome back. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and today we're going to take a look at a watch that is perfect for anyone with slimmer wrists. With the new 39mm Hexmariner from Revelot, which has recently gone up for pre-sale direct on their site. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's probably because you remember the larger 42mm version that launched last year on Kickstarter, and this is their follow-up with a smaller 39. Although launched may be an understatement, as that 42mm version from last year raised $170,000 within a few minutes, making it one of the more successful Kickstarters from last year, and making the smaller version one that's highly anticipated among their fans. Now, before we dive into this one, there are a couple things to note here. The first thing is that Revelot sent me not only one prototype, but two prototypes to check out. But remember, these are prototypes, therefore the standard prototype warning applies, which does including being aware that some changes will be made to the production units. Second, Revelot actually surprised me by saying I could keep both of these prototypes. Now, since I don't need two, I'm happy with just one. That means giveaway. So stay tuned until the end of the video to find out how you can enter to win one of these. And lastly, I'm actually a little bit late to the party with this one, and that's partially because I got sick at the very beginning of the month. Maybe you can tell with my voice, and it pretty much just wiped me out. My voice is still not 100%. But I noticed on their website that a lot of the colorways are already starting to sell out, and I wanted to make sure that my viewers get a chance to get one if they're actually interested. So the show must go on, as they say. Now, that said, let's dive into the specs. The 39mm Hexmariners are, well, 39mm. And along with that comes a fairly short lug-to-lug of 44mm, making this a watch that's perfect for a wide variety of wrist sizes, including those with more slender wrists. As for total thickness, it's 13mm, and that does include an exhibition caseback with a flat sapphire crystal on top, which is not overly thin, but fairly standard for a diver with 200 meters of water resistance, and especially one that's powered by Seiko NH35A. The case here is 316L stainless, with a 20mm lug width and a bezel insert that is ceramic. Now, if you haven't noticed this already, just take a good look at the case, as well as the name, and at that point it should become fairly obvious that this is an homage to the Submariner. But it's one that's been hexified, or maybe geometrified, or Robloxified, Minecraftified. Basically, they've taken those smooth curves of the subby and made them more industrial and angular with sharper edges, changing things up a bit and perhaps upping the tool watchness of the design as well. Although those design elements just don't stop at the case. This continues on to the bracelet and particularly every aspect of the dial underneath the crystal. For those of you who hate homages, I'm sure you've already had a reaction hearing that word, but at least this is how an homage I think should be done, where they take something as an inspirational starting point and then run with it in a completely different direction, giving it really a life of its own. Now, regardless of the origins of the design, the finishing here is quite good for the price, as well as the bezel. It's 120 click, unidirectional, with almost no backplay, as well as a nice action. The clickiness here is a tad muted compared to other brands, but overall it's still very good. The design of the insert itself is still very subby, with perhaps the exception of this Superman-looking logo thing at the top, which honestly I think looks rather cool on the blue version. Over at the right, there is a signed screw-down crown. It is a tad small, but it's not too hard to get a grip on and turn, at least with my fingers. Turning the watch over, you get a glimpse of the screw-down exhibition caseback, which is supposedly sapphire. And here's where the brand has decided to put this really reflective hexagonal mesh plate over everything. It's actually a little hard to photograph, so let me just show you one of the stock images with it. It's different, as well as it is interesting, but at the same time, it kind of blocks the view of the movement. And when you've decided to use an exhibition caseback, blocking the movement doesn't really make any sense. So I wonder just really what the point of it is here. And perhaps they would have been better with a closed caseback that had a hexagonal theme. Anyway, let's move back to the front and check out the dial. One thing I really want to give Revelot credit for here is just the large number of colorful and good-looking colorways. they have gone the extra distance just in terms of giving you options. The two we have here is the blue radium storm as well as the gray storm meteorite. And obviously the difference between the two is the dial, where the blue radium is the regular dial that has this very interesting crystal star pattern etched into it, and the meteorite is just a section of a meteorite. The basic design of both watches is the same, where the subby's dashes and dots have been replaced with these applied hexagons, all of which have a nice metallic framing that is then filled with luminous paint. On the blue radium, we have an off yellow or old radium used, whereas the meteorite has the white-looking BGW9 lume applied to it. On both versions, the indices look great, where the metallic framing has a nice height that gives it a good definition, as well as gives the watch some added depth. But I think that depth is even more so with the standard version with its textured dial. Just beyond the indices, we have a very faintly painted chapter ring, which is kind of hard to make out on both versions, as there's not a lot of contrast here, but it's especially so on the meteorite. Although one change they did mention with this meteorite version is that all the white painted sections are going to be painted blue with production units, just for added visibility. And speaking of visibility, if you look at the very sidewall of the watch underneath the crystal, you'll notice their branding written all over it. I think the first version, the 42mm Hexmariner, had hour indicators here etched into that sidewall, which evidently was pretty hard to read and I guess kind of useless. So I guess they just decided to make a billboard out of it. But seriously, I'm someone who really believes that when it comes to branding, less is more. And that if you go overboard and just slap your name everywhere, it winds up looking a little tacky. So this is one aspect I really don't like. But since it is on that sidewall, you're not going to see it very often, so it is tolerable. As for the hands, which are front and center, they also follow that hexagonal theming. Just like the indices, they look great, but I think the hour hand here does look a tad short. Moving down to the 6, there is a cutout for the date. Nice positioning here, and I do appreciate that the black date wheel blends in nicely with these colorways, or at least these two colorways. And then of course you have the standard branding and text on the dial, which I think they could have done with a little less here, because on the smaller dial it does make it look a little more crowded than it needs to. Or at least it does on the blue version. The white painted text on the meteorite really just blends into the background. But again, that is something they're changing. Overall, it's a good design, and I do appreciate that it has a very different look and feel than its inspiration. Between the two, I gotta say the meteorite version is my clear favorite, and that's really for two reasons. The first of which is that I love the blued hands here, and the clear amount of contrast and visibility it gives them against the meteorite dial. Plus, the blue, gray, and slight orange color scheme here is very different and unique. And the second reason is that I'm not fully sold on this diamond textured pattern on the regular versions. On the blue radium version, there's clearly less contrast to begin with. But even more so is that the dial pattern drastically changes depending on the light and angles. Most of the time it does look fantastic, with a really unique pattern and texturing that draws you in. But other times, on occasion, it winds up adding a lot of reflection and glare, to the point that I think it actually acts as a slight distraction against the hands and indices. So with regard to the giveaway, it's clear to me that I want to keep this gray meteorite version, which means the giveaway is going to be for this blue radium storm version. And again, stay tuned until the end to find out how you can get it. As for Lume, well, as you would expect with the different colorways, that the different Lume applied to them is going to perform differently. Both look good when the lights first go out, but it is obvious that the blue BGW9 on the meteorite version is much stronger than the old radium on the other, which is further confirmed with my longevity test. Although, to the Radium Storm's credit, it is mostly able to keep up with my Seiko diver, so it's a pretty good and strong application of old radium, and overall I'd say it still has good lume. It's just that the Gray Storm Meteorite is going to have even better. Movement-wise, as I've mentioned, both watches are utilizing a Seiko NH35A, the true workhorse of the affordable watch. Perfect movement for what they're trying to do here at this price point. As for the bracelet is great. It's an oyster-style bracelet that's also been hexified with these more defined angles. It has solid end links with a nice quick release, as well as a good milled clasp that has 5 micro adjusts, and solid links that are secured with a pin and collar type system. So overall, a good bracelet, with the only negative that I'd give it is that it uses male end links, which for a watch of this size isn't really a problem on my wrist, but it does increase the overall effect of lug to lug, so I always do prefer female end links. The bracelet also tapers from 20mm at the watch head to 18 at the clasp, which combined with the shorter links, smaller watch head, and shorter lug to lug, make this a very comfortable diver to wear. And with the bracelet, it's nicely balanced and sits squarely on the middle of my 7¼ inch wrist. As for value, the early bird pricing varies depending on which watch you're looking at, and it ranges from $257 US for the regular versions all the way up to $360 for the Meteorite, which these days is pretty good for a watch with these specs. Good size, good lume, nice ceramic bezel, and a good bracelet. For comparison, Zelos recently released a new version of their 40mm swordfish, and that's a watch with very similar specs for $299 US. And in true Zelos tradition, those sold out pretty much instantly. So in comparison, pretty good price here. Bottom line, good watch for a great price. Now, I'm still not completely sold on that hex dial, but it does give the watch a very unique look, making this a watch that's ideal for those that have always wanted a smaller subby that has a little bit of a twist, which granted is a very select audience, but either way, it's still a good watch. So if you're looking for a smaller diver, which isn't always easy to find, I'd say give the Hexmariner a good look. As for the giveaway, down in the description there's going to be a link to an unlisted video, and that's where you're going to enter, as well as I'll tell you more about the rules. I know it's an extra hoop, but I'm having to do this just to help avoid the scammers that have been plaguing YouTube giveaways lately. But before you head off there, make sure you let me know down below what you think about the Hexmariner, or if you can think of any other smaller divers you'd like to see on the channel. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time. See you next time.